In at number 5 we have The Cabin in the Woods Monsters Revealed. What makes The Cabin in the Woods such a fun movie is that it's sort of like a choose your own adventure for a group of teens, except instead of adventure, it's death. Choose your own death. Released in 2011, directed by Drew Goddard, and written by himself and Joss Whedon, The Cabin in the Woods follows a group of college students who head to an isolated cabin in the woods for a getaway. However, things turn grisly when monstrous killers emerge to hunt them down and kill the teens. We learn pretty quickly though that this was all a setup and that an underground organization orchestrated the entire situation, with them needing a blood sacrifice to appease the gods living beneath the earth. Depending on what our characters interact with in the cabin, it triggers a certain monster, hence the choose your own death element of the story. Spoilers ahead for those who haven't watched the movie. 2 of the teens make it inside of the organization and find the technicians, the people who have been orchestrating the events, and they turn their weapons on the creators, setting free the monsters who are caged inside and set them loose, resulting in one hell of a bloodbath. With each ding of the elevator, a new monster emerges, ready to take down the technicians and the armed guards, and no one stands a chance. From a giant snake, to a witch, to a werewolf, a clown, and of course the infamous merman, this scene is truly legendary and I guarantee will be discussed for many years to come. Overall, this film is a damn good time and one I return to each and every year. In at number 4 we have Scanner's Head Explosion. This particular scene has become iconic over the years, with it being the perfect gift to send when you're having the of days. That's what I've learned anyway. Released in 1981 and directed by David Cronenberg, this science fiction Canadian horror movie tells the story of scanners, people with unusual telepathic and telekinetic powers. A company called Consec seeks these scanners out to use them as weapons. However, Daryl Revok isn't having this and he wages a war against the company, with Consec fighting back by dispatching their own weapon. Now this particular scene I'm going to be talking about I guarantee you have seen, even if you haven't watched the movie. It's become iconic over the years and like I mentioned previously, since being turned into a GIF you can find this moment everywhere. Anyway, in this particular scene, Daryl shows off to a live audience just how powerful his scanner abilities are by exploding the head of a man next to him. It's horrific, disturbing, gruesome, yet so much fun to watch. Better still, the scene still holds up, with the effects being timeless. It's one of the craziest scenes in any horror movie, but that's what makes it so great. Regardless of whether you like scanners or not, you have to admit this scene was a damn good time. In at number 3 we have A Nightmare on Elm Street, Freddy's Long Arms. A Nightmare on Elm Street is still to this day one of the greatest horror movies of all time, with the villain Freddy Krueger being one of the most iconic characters, cementing himself in history as one of the best and scariest antagonists. Released in 1984 and directed by Wes Craven, A Nightmare on Elm Street follows a group of teens in Ohio who become tormented in their dreams by the supernatural Freddy Krueger, a bladed killer who was burned to death by some of the townspeople and is now trapped in a dream world, killing innocents in their dreams. The worst thing though, if Freddy kills you in your dream, you die in real life. Anyway, the movie starts off with a bang, with the character of Tina facing off against the burned villain in her dreams, with him chasing her down an alleyway outside of her home. It's an iconic moment but so damn terrifying as Freddy extends his arms to an absurd length, dragging his knife hand across the garage door and laughing a maniacal laugh. The scene is scary because right from the off it's informing us that Freddy is capable of anything in Dreamworld. No matter what you do, he will always find you and he will kill you. He holds all the power. Spoilers ahead for the odd few who haven't seen the movie, things don't end well for Tina as Freddy kills her, with her boyfriend watching on as her floating body is cut up. It's a disturbing scene with us realizing early on that no one can help you if you're trapped in the dream world with Freddy. All you need to do is wake up, it's not that easy, with the character of Nancy learning that throughout the rest of the movie. In at 2 we have Pet Sematary, Zelda. Zelda quickly became one of the scariest characters in horror movie history after the release of the 1989 horror movie Pet Sematary, despite only appearing on screen for around 3 minutes. An adaptation of the 1983 Stephen King novel of the same name, Pet Sematary follows the Creed family who move to a new home in the countryside. Everything is peaceful at first until they learn of the creepy cemetery behind their home. On Thanksgiving, while the family is away, their cat is hit by a car on the highway, so they bury the cat, Church, in the pet cemetery, for which it is so aptly named, and as we know, Church returns, but not as the cat they knew and loved. Nope. the cat is different now. Sometime later, the son of the Creed family, Gage, is also struck by a truck and killed. Like Church, he is buried in the cemetery, only to return as a malevolent child who tries to kill his family. The movie is a lot with the father making bad decision after bad decision. However, the scariest element of the entire thing is Zelda, the deceased sister of Rachel Creed, the mother. Now, we learn throughout the movie that Zelda suffered from spinal meningitis, which crippled her body and left Rachel with nightmares about her sister. What makes these nightmares even worse is that Zelda doesn't appear as a normal sickly child, but instead she is played by a 20-something man, turning the character into a monster who is plaguing Rachel's dreams and scaring all of us for years to come. As we know, they made a remake of Pet Sematary in 2019, which was trash, with Zelda being not nearly as terrifying, so if you have yet to watch the film, make sure you check out the 1989 version. And finally, coming in at number 1, we have Freaks, One of Us. Freaks is personally one of my favourite classic horror movies of all time, and I haven't had the chance to discuss it yet on this channel, which is a damn shame, but it's happening now and I'm very happy about it. Released in 1932 and directed by Todd Browning, Freaks follows a group of carnival sideshow performers, with one of them, a trapeze artist, plotting a scheme to seduce and murder one of the performers in the troupe, Hans, in order to gain his inheritance. However, the plot leads to some very unfortunate and disturbing consequences. Spoilers ahead for those who haven't watched Freaks. After falling ill, Hans learns of his bride's plan to kill him, so he teams up with the rest of the sideshow performers and gets revenge on his bride in the most disturbing and memorable way possible. The finale of this movie is a doozy and one of the reasons it was banned in the United Kingdom for over 30 years. The performers give Hans' bride a new appearance, combining her with a chicken, forcing her to live the rest of her life as something people pay to look at and laugh at. It's the sweet revenge she so greatly deserved. Now, this movie is genuinely unsettling. It's not necessarily scary, but definitely lingers with you for years to come. It is also responsible for one of the most quoted lines in history: "One of us, one of us, one of us." Not to mention, it is regarded as one of the greatest horror movies of all time, with it having a serious impact on pop culture. Some may or may not know, but American Horror Story Freak Show pays homage to Freaks, with the season being almost identical to the movie, with some added flavour of course. I do suggest to those who haven't seen the movie that you check it out immediately. I actually wrote my university dissertation on this film. Big fan.
Number 5. You're next. Hey, family dinners are always a bit awkward, aren't they? You know, trying to get the gravy passed to you, trying to avoid an argument with your uncle about your career, and trying to elude the vicious sickos that are hunting you and your family for sport. You're Next is a 2011 slasher directed by Adam Wingard, who also blessed us with Godzilla vs. Kong, one of the finest films ever made. Made on a humble $1 million budget, You're Next is a horror movie that brings it to the absolute basics. One house, one troubled family, and 3 very dangerous psychopaths. An estranged family is meeting for a reunion at their summer home in the rural Deep South, and newcomer to the family, Erin, is nervous to be introduced officially as her boyfriend's long-term partner. Now, tensions are high enough with the usual family drama before the first crossbow bolt pierces the window, as the family is being hunted by a relentless pack of bloodthirsty animal mask-wearing lunatics who seem to be doing this whole thing just for kicks. Watch the family fall apart under pressure, metaphorically and uncomfortably literally, as they're picked off one by one by their sick predators, until one of them starts to rise up unexpectedly against their tormentors. Now, if you were a fan of the Hotline Miami games, this is probably as close as you're ever gonna get to a movie for that 80s splatter feel and all the animal mask wearing lunatics. You're Next feels like a movie that got time traveled from 1984 in the best way. It's a throwback to the golden age of B-horror movies. Wet, gross, stupid, and in the darkest ways, really funny. This movie's almost a dysfunctional family comedy, if you can call it that. It's sinister, sick, gruesome, and hilarious, has an absolutely great sense of style, really cool soundtrack, and I guarantee you the main song from the movie is gonna get stuck in your head for weeks afterwards. Definitely check You're Next out if you're looking for some fluffy horror fun. I've got a DVD at home if you want to borrow it. Now, hey ghouls and goblins, you already know that the best place for the scary video— Hey ghouls and goblins, you already know the best place for scary videos on the web is right here, but if somehow you didn't know that, always a good time to learn, so why don't you subscribe so you never miss a scare. Number 4. The Color Out of Space. When we think H.P. Lovecraft, we tend to think of giant squid monsters and incomprehensible madness. Well, this movie's got one of those in folds, and it's not the squid monster. The Color Out of Space is a 2019 horror movie directed by Richard Stanley, adapting the H.P. Lovecraft story of the exact same name, but modernizing it slightly slightly, bringing it up to the 21st century. The story details a father moving his family to his late father's farm, escaping the bright lights and humdrum of city life, moving to his hometown of Arkham, the exceedingly cursed city from Lovecraft's writings. What should be a breath of fresh air and lovely times in the cottage turns to a nightmare when an asteroid falls to the farm, releasing with it a mysterious color that seeps into the farmland. A color out of space, if you will. It affects the minds of everyone around the farm, all the animals, and begins to seep into the water and drive everyone to incomprehensible madness. Nick Cage plays the patriarch of the Gardner family, and let me tell you, there could not possibly have been a better actor for the lead in a movie about slowly going mad. I mean, Nick Cage on his absolute best day already seems like he's about 2 screws short of absolute madness, so watching him in this is a treat. You spend the entire time wondering if the insanity is taking him over and consuming his brain, or if that's just how Nicolas Cage talks and he thinks he's doing a New England accent right now. Color Out of Space builds really slowly, leaving you on edge the entire time, and when the madness sets in, it sets in hard as you painfully watch the farmstead fall, desperate that maybe, just maybe, someone will pull through against the immeasurable horror of some entity beyond the cosmos. It captures Lovecraft's writing effortlessly and brings it to the modern age flawlessly, with all the blood and insanity you could hope for. Number 3. The Void. Our next entry on this list is The Void, a 2016 horror flick by Steven Kostanski, another Lovecraft horror movie. Your host has a little bit of a bias, and this one's Canadian made, so I have to include it based on that alone. It also totally rocks, so there is that. The Void is another flick that feels like it time traveled through the mid-80s, and maybe it's just my personal tastes, but that is very much a good thing. The Void seems like the kind of thing John Carpenter would have slapped his name on. A small-town deputy has his night wildly disturbed when he finds someone suffering from violent injuries, and after taking him to the local hospital, finds himself trapped in the hospital with his ex-wife, a nurse, who's dealing with a crisis of her own, as the hospital is being overrun by an onslaught of mysterious injuries and madness. The two estranged lovers find themselves caught in a blood-soaked conflict between a sinister cult and some entity that appears able to revive the dead, albeit a bit twisted into horrifying monstrosities of flesh and bone. Now, if you're like me and you think The Thing is the greatest horror movie ever made, The Void feels like it could be its unofficial sequel. It's better than the actual sequel prequel to The Thing that they made. The special effects on the monsters are fantastic. If you're the kind of ghoul who loves puppets, prosthetics, and gallons worth of corn syrup blood, The Void has everything you are looking for in those 3 spades. And the plot is fun, and it has some good twists and turns, but let's be honest here. You're watching this one because it's got very gross monsters and really cool Lovecraft-inspired mythos of cults and a great god beyond the stars. You want my advice? Grab a friend or two, order the largest, greasiest pizza your local favorite spot has, grab a 2-liter of something carbonated, and have a great Friday night with this one. The Void to me is what a good horror movie should be. Gross, scary, a little stupid, and a ton of fun. Number 2, Hush. Okay, enough movies about incomprehensible horrors from beyond the stars. Let's reel it in a bit, and let's get back to some comprehensible horror. Home invasion. Lock those doors. Oh, sorry, I forgot to turn the volume up. Hush is a 2016 slasher home invasion movie coming to us from Blumhouse horror icon Mike Flanagan, director of a ton of amazing horror projects like Oculus, Dr. Sleep, Midnight Mass, The Haunting of shows, and Hush is no exception to that rule. A deaf and mute horror writer, that's why I did that before, who lives alone with her cat in the woods with a few isolated neighbors around her, becomes the unwilling target in the most dangerous game when a twisted hunter decides to make her his prey. After hunting her neighbor with a crossbow, he sets his sight on her next. When he learns that his next victim is deaf and mute, it seems like he finds himself thrilled at the possibility of a challenge. Now, Hush could have very easily just been your run-of-the-mill slasher home invasion movie, but it stands a lot taller than that with some incredibly fantastic sound design. I mean, I would hope so, given the premise of the movie and the name of the movie. The movie is so tense and saves its sounds really effectively for when it knows it's going to be the scariest. Makes it a lot scarier than the usual horror movies with a bombastic booming soundtrack and tons of scare hordes. It lets you really breathe in the tension. The cat and mouse game between the protagonist Maddie and the unnamed hunter feels deeply personal, putting you smack dab in the middle of it, chewing your fingernails the entire time as you hope for the best. Please check out Hush. Now, number 1, Green Room. Coming in at our number 1 spot is one of my favorite horror thrillers of all time, Green Room, an A24 horror classic before that was even a cool thing to describe your movie as. A failing Midwestern punk band are trying to hit it big while traveling the Northwest, barely scraping by on instant ramen and van life when they agree to play a gig at a rural roadhouse. Absolutely thrilled at the prospect of getting paid for once, the band takes the gig without asking any questions, only to swiftly discover upon arriving that they are in bad company. The bar is ran and owned by a skinhead gang who don't take kindly to them whatsoever. After the bassist witnesses a crime in the eponymous Green Room, the band is trapped by the gang who refuses to let them leave. Alive. From here, the movie turns into a sort of reverse home invasion as the band tries desperately to escape the clutches of the gang by any means necessary. Green Room is tense. You are going to feel like you are trapped in there with them. If you've ever survived a local DIY show basement, then the sights of Green Room will look pretty familiar to you. Setting a high-octane horror movie in such a hostile environment that you'll recognize makes it feel all the more real. You know, I've seen countless horror movies in haunted houses, but I can't name that many in a bar basement. Green Room is horror at some of its best, taking a concept I guarantee you haven't seen before and exploring it beyond just a simple bloody slasher. Fantastic camera work, dark humor, and a gripping plot with lovable characters and truly hateable villains. We are 3 paragraphs into me talking about this, and I haven't even dropped the biggest bomb, which is that the leader of the skinhead gang is played by Sir Patrick Stewart in one of his most unhinged roles ever since maybe American Dad. I'd say he steals this thing, but honestly everybody delivers. Anton Yelchin also delivers one of the best performances of his career as the band's weary, tortured bassist. Go into Green Room expecting a super tense, shockingly gory, but amazing horror movie if you can brave it. Just make sure you get a stamp on your wrist so you can leave. Number 5, Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey. Who doesn't love taking a trip down to the 100-acre woods with Winnie the Pooh and all his funny friends? These beloved childhood characters are ready to shine on the silver screen. In a sequel to Pooh's Heffalump adventure, please welcome Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey, an ultra-violent splatterhouse slasher set in the 100-acre woods, reimagining the beloved children's characters as bloodthirsty maniacs who spend a whole lot less time playing around and eating honey and getting stuck in trees and more time chasing people with axes and rusty pickaxes and stuff. Oh bother. Trailers and photos of Blood and Honey went viral pretty much immediately because I think everyone saw it and kind of did the same thing where we were like, that's real? What? Yeah, it is. Copyright law and public domain is a wild, wild thing. Winnie the Pooh is public domain, so you watching at home, if you want to make your own Winnie the Pooh movie, this is my invitation. You go right ahead. So here we are, where we have an ultra-violent Winnie the Pooh movie. Something absolutely no one was asking for, but I'm glad we have anyway, because at the very least, I can't claim to have ever seen a movie like this, really. And you know what? Credit where it's due, it does actually look pretty unnerving. Pooh looks the most terrifying he ever has, a far cry from all of our nice memories of him. Piglet as well has gone from like a cute little cutie to like a hillbilly horror. Eeyore, my favorite, he's not around because if the plot summary on IMDb is anything to go by, Winnie the Pooh ate him. He's probably happier now, I guess. That's kind of what he always wanted. I think this will be a fun watch, kind of a movie to get a big pepperoni pizza and some snacks and a few friends around. I don't think it'll win an Oscar, but the novelty will do it for me. If it turns out to be a big success, director Rice Frake Waterfield has spoken out about how he wants to make an entire series of public domain slasher movies, eventually building up to a shared universe because everyone wants some of that sweet, sweet MCU money. Me personally, I would love to see the new Winnie the Pooh going toe-to-toe with Peter Rabbit in a horror movie Alien vs. Predator situation. I know they've had tension for years. Time will tell if this dream will come to light, but pre-production has already started on a Peter Pan movie in a similar vein to Blood and Honey, so expect a blood-soaked trip to Neverland sometime in the near future. But if you can't wait and you want more horror content right now, you don't need to grab a ticket to the movies. You can just stay subscribed to Top 5 Scary for more premium horror content literally every single day. We got scary stuff for every occasion, so click through and I'm certain you'll find something to like. But finish up this one first, okay? We got lots more movies to go. Number 4, Skinnamarink. I love a low-down horror. Even better, like a low-down, low-budget found footage horror. Some of my favorite flicks are stuff like Blair Witch Project or VHS. It's a great way for lower-budget productions to stand out, where you can't just rely on tons and tons of gore effects or CGI monsters to serve up scares and have to, you know, use creative filmmaking. So let me introduce Skinnamarink, a Canadian experimental horror film made on an absolute shoestring budget that has critics singing praises and double-checking their hallways just to make sure no evil got inside. Skinnamarink is about as bare bones as a movie can get. It was made on a budget that was less than the price of most used cars and was shot entirely on digital in the childhood home of the director, which I guess would technically make this a whole movie. Skinnamarink is one of those ones where really the less you know about it, the better, so I don't want to give too much away, so I'll give you the little IMDb teaser and hopefully that's enough to excite you. The son and daughter of a family wake up in the middle of the night, discover that their father is missing, and discover that something is happening to the house as all windows, doors, and entrances and exits to the outside world appear to just be vanishing. The director, Kyle Edward Ball, is making his cinema debut with Skinnamarink, and prior to this he made short films on a YouTube channel inspired by commenters' nightmares that they had when they were young. Skinnamarink is no different, with some reviewers pointing out that it was the kind of movie that made them feel like they were young again, wanting to pull a blanket over their eyes, afraid of boogeymen in the dark or monsters under the bed. So if you're looking for tons of action, movie monsters, blood splatters, Skinnamarink is not really that at all. But if you want a slower, very down-to-earth, grounded, low-budget horror movie, Skinnamarink will have you glued to the scene, glued to the screen. I literally can't read today. I'd say if you're a fan of stuff like the Blair Witch Project, you owe it to yourself to give Skinnamarink a shot. Plus, let's shout out as many independent Canadian filmmakers as we can. Number 3, Hellraiser 2022. The original Hellraiser is one of my absolute favorite horror films ever, which I think tells you just about everything you need to know about me. I mean, I love the Cenobites and I love all the sights they have to show me. The original movie is scary, absolutely gut-churningly disgusting, and it's a piece of special effect wizardry that still holds up to this day. It also gave us one of the best, creepiest horror movie icons with Pinhead. Originally dubbed the Priest, the tall, slender demon, or angel to some, who enjoys pleasure and heart-stopping pain in equal measures. So when they announced that they were going to reboot Hellraiser and also recast Pinhead, myself and a lot of fans were more than a little hesitant at a new take on the classic character, but then I found out it was being directed by David Bruckner, who made The Ritual and worked on VHS, and I knew the film was in good hands, and lo and behold, hey, it was pretty good. The visual effects and gore for the new film are some of the best out there. The new design for Pinhead is horrifyingly cool, trading out the old goth kid at a nightclub look for a terrifying flayed skin design, making it look like she's wearing a costume when really she's just naked and had all her skin peeled, which is the most Hellraiser thing ever. And oh yeah, Pinhead's a girl now. Slip that in like it was nothing. For me, a Hellraiser film's most important quality above all else is it goopy and gross. Does it make me want to cover my eyes and not look at whatever's on the screen? Yeah? Then this is a great Hellraiser film, and I want to see more through cracks of my fingers, so give it a watch. I wish this one could have been in theaters. It's streaming on Hulu for those who get that, and available on digital purchase everywhere else. Go in, give it an open mind, if for nothing else than its gross out effects. I know that doesn't really sound like a pleasant selling point for a movie. If you're gonna see Hellraiser, that's exactly what you want. Number 2, Knock at the Cabin. Now, depending on how you feel, M. Night Shyamalan is either a total hack who's been coasting for years on a dwindling reputation, or is a misunderstood auteur who's one of the last unique voices in horror cinema, and it really doesn't seem like there's much wiggle room for where people fall on that guy. So let me know down below in the comments what you think about old M. Night. Genius or total goof? Knock at the Cabin is the newest Shyamalan flick starring Dave Bautista and Jonathan Groff. It's an apocalyptic psychological horror thriller, which is a great combination of words in my opinion. Bautista and Groff play parents of a young girl who are vacationing out in a cabin. But things take a dour turn when the family is apprehended by armed bandits who insist that they've seen prophetic visions of the end of days. And the only way to prevent the apocalypse from claiming the globes will be to sacrifice a member of their own family. That's all the recipe for a good thriller for me. Now, Knock at the Cabin just came out and I haven't even had time to see it yet. I only get so much time away from the fog. I watch 4 movies a year to be honest, and they're the same movies I've been watching since I was a kid. So we'll see if it stands the test of time and if it'll be a classic or a flop, but I've heard lots of great things from a lot of my friends who like these kind of movies. So, you know what? We'll catch up to this one and I'll loop back around. I'll let you know how I feel. Keep an eye out for another video like this where I'll bring up Knock at the Cabin again. And number 1, The Exorcist. Hey, wait a second. The Exorcist already came out. That was like a long time ago. It came out in like 1973. I know they made some sequels and stuff, and you can always crank some more out, but we're getting a brand new Exorcist movie in 2023? Oh, and it's serving as a sequel to the original 1973 film, and disregarding all other sequels in favor of a new timeline. That kind of sounds like what they did with Halloween, you know, in 2018 when that guy David Gordon Green made a Halloween sequel that was a sequel to the original film only, and erased all the other so-so sequels and brought back the old characters and everything, and it was pretty good. And oh, David Gordon Green is directing this Exorcist movie too. So this guy's just got one trick then. He makes sequels to classic horror movies. We don't know a whole lot about the new Exorcist movie. In fact, if you go to IMDb right now, it's officially listed as Untitled The Exorcist Film, which I don't think is the catchiest name. That's probably gonna look a little bit busy on the movie poster. So far, the only confirmed details that we know for certain is that David Gordon Green is directing, and Ellen Burstyn will be reprising her role as the mother from the original Exorcist film. Just like how Jamie Lee suited up to beat Michael Myers around the block in Halloween 2018. Now, will this new Exorcist movie be good? Personally, I'm pretty optimistic. The 2018 Halloween is fantastic, and is my opinion the second best Halloween movie ever made, after the first one, which carries a lot for me. The other two in the trilogy didn't do much for me, but that's neither here nor there. We've had a lot of good possession movies coming out. The Conjuring franchise is mostly about that, so I think it would be pretty cool to see a new one from a guy who we all know can deliver a good legacy horror sequel and can bring up some scares and respect an old franchise.
Coming in at number 5, we've got the upside down hacksaw surprise from Terrifier. Man, when is Terrifier 2 coming out again? I just want to see if they can top this. Going back to All Hallows Eve, there are some pretty gnarly moments, but none are done up like this bit. You see it all here, full view. Nothing is left to the imagination, save for what might happen in the future. Sometimes the more effective scare comes from leaving the viewers in suspense, unable to guarantee what just happened. That is not the case for this scene. Good lord, Art, did you have to do it like that? Terrifier is a largely disturbing movie throughout its entire runtime. It mostly feels like a special effects artist making a movie to showcase his wares. The grosser, greasier, and gorier the better. Plus, Art the Clown makes a bid for a new slasher icon. If you want to make an impression, you can't just copy what the greats have already done, you've got to cover new ground. So, we get a plethora of painful moments at the hands of the black and white clown. Feces smeared on bathroom walls, bits and pieces sliced off poor unsuspecting victims, and of course the upside down hacksaw surprise. Nobody wants to watch their friends die right in front of their eyes. It's a horrible thing to behold no matter what the circumstance. But the way this kill goes down is in a league of its own. After stabbing, drugging, and tying up Tara, Art begins a presentation in the style of a cheap stage magician. He reveals his lovely helper, Tara's friend Dawn, who is dangling spread eagle by her ankles. After some grandstanding and an extravagant flourish, he produces a hacksaw. He walks up to his nude, helpless victim and starts hacking away, right between the thighs and all the way down to her head. Blood sprays out, Dawn screams, and Tara can do nothing but helplessly watch on as her friend is bisected by this killer clown. It is just so painful to watch. I don't know what's worse, the fact that Tara has to watch as her friend is cleaved in two, the fact that the sawing starts at a place that nobody wants a sharp object, or the hideous smile Art puts on for the entirety of the ordeal. It's all bad. Coming in at number 4, we've got the ceremonial cliff jumping from Midsommar. You can usually judge a movie's effectiveness by audience reactions when something crazy happens. A lot of the time, while seeing horror movies in theaters, you'll get some gasps or laughs, or maybe even someone whispering, "Don't go in there." But that means that they're doing what they're meant to do, elicit reactions. But what if the audience is totally silent? Well, that just about sums up my experience with seeing this scene on opening weekend. The room went dead silent, which matched up pretty well with the audio as it happened. Even the kids who snuck in and were giggling at uncomfortable moments shut up for a second, which is pretty wild. That is how effective and disturbing this scene is. Midsommar is a beautiful, brutal movie. It's not for everyone, and scenes like this are part of the reason why. There are plenty of disturbing moments for sure, from the coerced breeding subplot to the blood eagle to that final scene with the bear suit, but the cliff jumping really stands out as eye-popping and heart-stopping. It's the first big oh sh** moment in the movie, and nobody can really do anything about it. Danny and her pals have been trying to acclimate to the odd culture and rituals of those living in the commune, but so much of what the people do seems backwards to them. This ceremony, in which two of the eldest members of the commune decide to end their own lives, is too much for some. After a day of ritualistic meals, everyone treks to a rocky cliff. The two elders, now aged 72, are carried to the top and look out over their community. One by one, without any real warning, they hurl themselves over the edge, crashing to the ground below. To the visitors, who had no idea this was happening today, this comes as a major shock. One of the cliff jumpers' head explodes like a melon, instantly killing them. The second jumper, however, hits the ground feet first. This shatters his legs, but doesn't kill him immediately. His groans of agony can be heard as a commune member carrying an enormous mallet strides over to put the poor man out of his misery. As this horrifying display of death is happening, all of the members of the commune begin to mimic the pain the two must have felt as they died. Wails and cries ring out, breaking the eerie silence and adding layers of discomfort to the whole situation. This mixture of culture shock, unexpected death, and brutal bodily mutilation makes this scene extremely disturbing and difficult to stomach, especially if you didn't expect it coming in. In a way, the unexpected nature of it really puts the audience in the shoes of the group of visitors. It's almost as if you were there yourself. Coming in at number 3, Cannibal Consumption from Hostel Part 2. The entire Hostel series is predicated on being as disturbing and raunchy as possible. Eli Roth is a man with extreme tastes, and he wants everyone to know it. So after the rip-roaring success of his first torture porn venture, of course some sequels were gonna get made. And what can a horror sequel do other than try and top the kills from its predecessors? Of course, the premise of young folks being kidnapped and sold at a facility full of people willing to pay to kill doesn't change much, but the brutality is elevated and the kills are more gnarly than ever. Maybe a little more self-referential too. In the scene we're talking about today though, they make sure to make use of a very upsetting taboo: cannibalism. Poor Miroslav, tied to a table, forced to watch the director of Cannibal Holocaust eat his leg meat. Yep, you heard me right. Roth brought in Ruggero Deodato to play the part of this Italian cannibal, and the poor dude on the table is kept alive and conscious for the entire process. So as choice cuts of meat are sliced away from his legs, he's got to endure the pain of the process and the knowledge that his body is being consumed by another person. There are a lot of layers to the disturbing imagery in this scene, to say the least. Coming in at number 2, the eyeball splinter from Zombie. Speaking of upsetting images from Italian directors, we're going to talk about some iconic ocular trauma. There's something about eyeballs that makes people squirm at the thought of them taking damage. Ever since that classic eye jelly scene in Un Chien Andalou, folks have leaned on eyeball destruction to disturb and fascinate their audiences. So when an enormous splinter slowly slides its way into someone's pupil, scrambles it, and then breaks off, you're gonna feel some discomfort. And that's exactly what happens in Lucio Fulci's Zombie. Or is it Zombie 2? We'll ignore that for now. Late one night, an undead intruder breaks into poor Paola's house. She shuts the door on it, but that's not nearly enough. The zombie breaks through the wooden door with its arm, exposing a very gnarly, very sharp splinter, then pulls her through the door, eventually bringing the splinter into contact with her eyeball. We see it all here. The splinter slowly comes towards her face and eventually impacts the pupil as if it were a bullseye. The jelly-like structure of the eye is sloshed around as it sinks deeper in, and eventually the splinter breaks off, tearing a good deal of goop inside of her eye socket to pieces. Ocular trauma. Seriously. And finally at number 1, Scalping and More from Bone Tomahawk. When you call your movie Bone Tomahawk, you best live up to that title. Thankfully, that's exactly what S. Craig Zoller did. Everything you would expect from a movie called Bone Tomahawk is here and more. The Wild West was a dirty, lawless, violent place. A lot of westerns tend to skip all of the gangrene and skin flaying that went on in favor of heroic stories of gunslingers and sarsaparilla. Not this one. Here we get folks addicted to opium and cannibalistic tribes kidnapping people to be used in their next meal. And with that comes a whole lot of human suffering. The most disturbing scene in Bone Tomahawk involves the use of that titular weapon to scalp a man alive. That's pretty rough on its own, but there's more. The man's scalp is then stuffed into his own mouth, and some teeth are broken to ensure that it all fits. Dental trauma is like ocular trauma and causes squeamishness like nothing else. Then, after the scalping and stuffing, the poor man is chopped in half with a blunt axe. I mean, it would be one thing if the axe was sharp, but holy smokes. Once the choppers get about halfway, they decide that's good enough and rip him in twain. We love the wet ripping sound of flesh being pulled apart. Yeah, this one tops the list for a reason. Well then, nightmare fuel for the coming days. There are scenes out there so disturbing that they affect people's ability to function normally from then on. We'll see if any of these manage to do that, eh? Coming in at number 5, we've got Supper Time from Audition. Takashi Miike's career is jam-packed with all sorts of top-tier disturbing moments. There's something he sees that most people don't, so he puts it to film for everyone else to enjoy. Well, actually, I don't know if enjoy is the right word. Regardless, the extreme and nasty stuff he manages to push out into the world is deeply affecting for all who behold it, so it's definitely worth a mention here. I may or may not have put 2 Miike films on this list, so if you have a guess as to the second, drop it down in the comments right now. We'll see if you're right when we get to it. But before we get to the other stuff, we should probably talk about the current entry, right? Okay, so Audition, a famously upsetting movie that starts out pretty innocuously. A widower is convinced by his son to seek a new wife and decides the best way to go about this is to hold auditions for the role. Kinda weird, but you know, what can you do? He gets his casting agent friend to set up some mock auditions so he can find out all the info he needs before trying to date these women, and eventually becomes infatuated with Asami. She seems like a perfect choice. At first, anyways. Over time, however, her dark past starts to affect the relationship. She starts acting strangely and our protagonist begins to wonder if something sinister is going on. She disappears for a while, leading to the widower attempting to find her and discovering that plenty of the places she used to frequent have pretty gruesome histories, often involving dismemberment. Uh-oh. Now, a lot of folks say that the wire torture scene is the most disturbing part of Audition. And yes, that is a truly upsetting scene to behold. But the flashback with the man in the bag is on a whole other level. My goodness, it's nasty. So in the flashback, we see that Asami had at one point kept a man in a large bag. He was missing his feet, a number of fingers, and his tongue. Worst of all, she only seemed to feed him one type of food via doggy bowl. Any guesses as to what that kind of food was? It was her vomit. Oh no. And for all of those who like to pay close attention, you might notice that this dude has no problem whatsoever consuming this puke immediately after it's placed in front of him. Which implies that she's had him here, helpless and hungry, eating vomit for an extended period of time. He is used to it at this point. The implications of this scene are stomach-turning to say the least. Supper time indeed. Coming in at number 4, we've got First, The Kids, from the house that Jack built. Speaking of directors with a penchant for the disturbing, here's a movie directed by Lars von Trier. He's made himself quite the career in crafting incredibly intense movies. They're not for everyone, that's for sure. Really, you could pull a scene from pretty much any of his features and it would fit on this list, but I keep coming back to the house that Jack built. Every kill is so carefully tailored to cause a different kind of visceral reaction. As you see this serial killer recount his kills in chronological order, you can see him choose different personas to use while pulling off his crimes. The sociopathic behavior allows for some absolutely nutty kills to happen, from the carjack to the dome, to the home invasion under charmingly false pretenses, all the way to the penultimate moment when Jack has a bunch of dudes tied up in the freezer. But the most disturbing has to be when he brings a young family into his orbit. Playing the role of the caring father figure, he convinces the mother of two that he's a good, solid guy that'll help raise her kids, and who wouldn't want that, right? So he brings them to the middle of nowhere on a supposed hunting trip. But this trip is really just a thinly veiled excuse to bring the trio away from society while also having access to guns. Boy, this one takes a turn. For the majority of their time in nature, he's friendly and dependable, but eventually this veneer fades away and the mother and her boys are left with a vicious murderer. He hunts them from a wooden pulpit at the edge of a field, forcing them to take cover. The mom tries to keep her boys close and covered, but one panics and runs away. Boom, he's shot dead. The second one is quick to follow, leaving Jack alone with Mother Dearest. After propping up the tiny corpses, he makes her have a picnic with him. Really despicable stuff. Coming in at number 3, we've got Hooks and Hot Oil from Ichi the Killer. And we're back to Miike. Unlike Audition, Ichi the Killer is cartoonish in its execution, which allows the viewers to put a little bit of space between themselves and what's happening on screen. This shouldn't be too surprising considering that this movie is based on a manga. So when all sorts of depraved, bloody, nasty stuff happens, it feels sort of otherworldly. It's so obviously not real that it can become super over the top and ends up as a bit of a spectacle. But there is one torture scene carried out by the masochistic, bleach blonde Yakuza tough Kakihara. After his boss goes missing, he captures the hapless Suzuki under the impression that he's the one who kidnapped him. The torture that ensues is unbelievably painful. First, he sticks hooks into the dude's back and suspends him from the ceiling. And when he's hanging there defenseless, he pierces his cheeks with chopsticks. From there, more chopsticks are inserted into more painful areas until eventually it's time for tempura. See, he's had some shrimp frying up this whole time and doesn't want the leftover oil to go to waste. So he pours the bubbling oil all over the hanging man's bare back, causing his skin to bubble and burst. It's not just the image that makes this hard to watch either, it's the sound of it all too. You might accidentally remember this scene next time you're cooking, which really isn't the best way to enjoy your food. Plus it turns out that the poor torture victim was innocent after all, so Kakihara cuts off the tip of his tongue to make up for it. Sure, that makes it all better. Coming in at number 2, we've got Skinned Alive from Martyrs. If you ask the average internet user what the most disturbing movie of all time is, a lot of the time you will get the answer Martyrs, and for good reason. Other disturbing classics like Salo, a Serbian film, and The Men Behind the Sun will often get mentioned too, but there's something extra special about the French extremist flick. It could be the sympathetic characters, or maybe it's the wild gut punch of discovery when the demon is revealed to be something unexpected, followed by the hidden lab beneath the house opening up. Could be the bleak, depressing message too. But of course, folks are gonna want to talk about the horrific torture sequences most of all. And what better bit to bring up than the total lack of skin? Yeah, after intense mental degradation and many brutal beatings, poor Anna is flayed alive. All of her skin gone. And she survives. So we get an eyeful of her musculature, down to the most grisly details. And she can see something that the rest of humanity cannot, thanks to her near-death martyred state. What that might be, we can't really know, but whatever she told Mademoiselle while in this state was bleak enough to cause her to end her own life immediately. So there's that. And finally at number 1, we've got the tortoise from Cannibal Holocaust. So you might want to skip this one if you have issues with animal torture. Like the rest of the scenes up until this one are gross and tough to watch, but it was all done via special effects using actors who knew exactly what they were doing. Cannibal Holocaust, on the other hand, is famously real. So if it sounds like that might be too much, take the rest of the day off. Filmed as a pseudo-documentary detailing the exploits of a film crew that discovers the lost film canisters from the previous explorers who were there to learn about the local cannibal tribes, we see a lot of nasty stuff. The stuff captured by the original crew is so disturbing, so upsetting and violent that the original TV station that was gonna air it watches this footage and decides to destroy all the footage. Now, a lot of the human-based violence here is horrifying. It is an exploitation film after all, but that's all done with actors and special effects. The animals that die in this movie, though, that's all for real. And one of the most upsetting scenes involves the dismemberment of a live tortoise. Instead of killing it outright and then doing the limb removal afterwards, the folks end up truly torturing this innocent creature. One of the actors even ended up having a breakdown after the scene wrapped, and really, I don't know what else to say about this one. So hopefully nobody's too disturbed after all that. Lots of gnarly, gruesome stuff out there if you know where to look.
Coming in at number 5, we have Jaws, the opening scene. Perhaps one of the most iconic opening scenes in cinematic history and one of the most disturbing, Jaws is an absolute classic. And this particular death scene is one that I can never get out of my head even if I tried. Released in 1975 and directed by Steven Spielberg, Jaws is based on the 1974 novel of the same name and tells the story of a man-eating great white shark who begins attacking beachgoers, resulting in police chief Martin Brody hunting it down with the help of a marine biologist and a professional shark hunter. Jaws is a classic and is the movie that sparked people's universal fear of sharks and open water, with the possibility of a shark attack occurring at any moment. Now, the movie's opening most certainly sets the tone for the rest of the movie to come, with it completely shocking audiences in the process and scarring the minds of many for years to come. Jaws opens at a beach party on Amity Island in the evening, with a young woman, Chrissy, running off to go skinny dipping with a guy. However, while she is treading water, she is violently pulled under by an unseen force. But we know at this point it's a shark. She is whipped around, screaming out for help, gurgling and trying to stay above water. However, not long after, she disappears below the surface and out of sight. That is until her remains are discovered on the beach the next day. It's a violent and upsetting scene, informing us that this shark is ruthless and will attack at any time, any place, and will kill you. Just don't go in the water. Sharks will eat you wherever you go, even in swimming pools. Those are facts. Coming in at number 4, Suspiria, Olga's Death. Now I'm specifically talking about the 2018 version, and not the superior 1977 movie, unfortunately. While I thought the 2018 remake was okay, nothing will ever top the greatness that was Dario Argento's eerie supernatural horror. Anyway, moving on, released in 2018 and directed by Luca Guadagnino, Suspiria stars Dakota Johnson as Susie Banyan, an American dancer who enrolls in a prestigious academy in Germany, which is revealed to be run by a coven of witches. Now, while I believe the 28 version doesn't come close to even touching Dario Argento's masterful work, it is still very well directed with a great cast. It's eerie, unsettling, with you left with the feeling that something just isn't quite right. It's incredibly dark, giving you no time at all to settle in, and to top it all off, it has one of the most disturbing and filthy scenes in cinematic history, that being the death of Olga. Olga is one of the first students begins to accuse the matrons of witchcraft, resulting in her becoming trapped in a room while Susie performs a dance for Madame Blanc, played by Tilda Swinton, who is amazing in this movie. However, witchcraft is at play in this scene, with Susie's movement inflicting harm upon Olga, resulting in her body contorting, her bones breaking, and her becoming completely mangled before being dragged away with large hooks by the other matrons. It's a hellish sequence showcasing early on what the witches at the Academy are capable of, and what lengths they will go to remain hidden. Poor Olga, she deserved so much better. RIP. Before we jump into number 3, be sure to give this video a big thumbs up, it really helps us out a lot, and it just shows me that you love me, and I need validation. In at number 3 we have Hereditary, The Pole. I mean, of course this death shocked almost every single person who saw Hereditary. It still shocks me now. Released in 2018 and directed by Ari Aster, Hereditary stars Toni Collette, Alex Wolff, Millie Shapiro, and Gabriel Byrne, and follows a family haunted by a mysterious presence following the death of their secretive grandmother. Now the movie is incredibly tense and uneasy, with you feeling quite constricted, almost that you can't breathe. It's a slow burn, but at the same time so much happens that you can't quite keep up with. Throughout the movie, it is revealed that a darker force may have latched itself onto the family through the grandmother, and it is being passed on to the daughter and then to the son. But what exactly is the dark force? Could it in fact be the evil demon Payment? Perhaps, but I don't want to ruin the entire movie for you. However, what I am allowed to ruin is one particular death, the death of Charlie, the daughter. Now, Charlie is incredibly reserved, staying away from most people and hiding out in her room where she exhibits strange behaviors. And following the passing of the grandmother who played a large part in raising Charlie, she begins to retreat more. So on one particular night when the son Peter was heading to a party, his parents forced him to take Charlie along as well. Now this is where everything spirals out of control. After having a reaction to nuts, Charlie begins to go into anaphylactic shock, forcing Peter to speed down the road trying to get her to safety. But safety never comes, because as Charlie opens the window of the car to get air and stick her head out, a deer runs right across the road. The car swerves and Charlie's head collides with a pole, decapitating her immediately. It's all very sudden, leaving you short breath and at a loss for words. It's one moment that no one saw coming, that's for sure. Sucks. Heads will roll. And that they did. Coming in at number 2, Final Destination 2, The Pipe and the Fence. Perhaps the most jarring moment on our entire list, Final Destination 2 isn't anything to write home about, but this scene definitely had people talking. Released in 2003 and directed by David R. Ellis, Final Destination is a supernatural horror movie starring the likes of Ali Larter, AJ Cook, and Michael Landis. The film is the second installment in the Final Destination series, which of course is a franchise that centers around different groups of people who escape impending death when one individual has a premonition about the accident to come. Then what always happens is they try to warn everyone of what is to come. Some listen, some don't, some live, some die. The ones who survive the accident then begin to die in the order they were supposed to die in the original accident. However, they can avoid death, but if they do, it'll skip to the next person before working its way right back to them. Now, the death always seemed to occur in very strange ways, whether it be the person going about a regular mundane task only for something terrifying to happen, such as you're brushing your teeth and then you fall in the bathtub and die. Going to a tanning bed only for something to fall and trap you in there and then you burn to death. Burn to a crisp. Anyway, the particular death I'm discussing is the one that occurs in Final Destination 2 towards the end of the movie. Now, in this particular scene, a group of survivors trying to cheat death are involved in an accident that sees them swerving off the road and crashing into a pile of PVC pipes that shoot through the windshield, narrowly avoiding the passengers except one. The person in the front seat, Kat, narrowly avoids death with one pipe shooting through the headrest. However, when emergency services arrive, they try to free her from the car, but while doing so, they accidentally aggravate the airbag, which releases, shoving Kat's head into the pole and killing her instantly. It's like this. There's the pole, that's her head. The cigarette she was smoking then drops onto the gasoline and explodes the car, launching barbed wire into the air that goes on to dismember one of the other passengers. It's all sudden, very shocking, and very violent, and I love it. And finally, coming in at number 1, Psycho, the shower scene. Now, while it may seem like the obvious choice, sometimes the obvious choice are the best choices. Released in 1960 and directed by Alfred Hitchcock, Psycho stars the likes of Anthony Perkins as Norman Bates and Janet Leigh as Marion Crane. Crane is an embezzler on the run who hides in an isolated motel run by the shy owner Norman Bates. However, Norman isn't as sweet and innocent as he initially appears to be, but that we don't learn until later on in the movie. What we are told though is that Norman's mother lives in the home up the hill from the motel, and she doesn't seem to be particularly happy that Marion is there. Now the movie dupes us early on. We're led to believe that Marion is the protagonist, and that we'll be following her over the course of the movie. However, a major plot twist occurs when Marion is taking a shower in her hotel room, only for a shadowy figure who appears to be a woman pulls back the shower curtains and stabs Marion to death. I didn't need to show that. Now this moment was very shocking but so pivotal, and is perhaps one of the best known scenes in cinematic history. At the time of the release, this type of scene was so unprecedented, resulting in many audience members being completely traumatized. Janet Leigh was deeply impacted by it as well, refusing to take showers afterwards unless she absolutely had to. Now despite the scene being incredibly graphic, there was actually never a puncture wound shown on screen. It's amazing what lighting can do to trick our minds.
Kicking off at number 5, The Hallow. As you may know, I'm a huge proponent for British horror, mainly because the only thing we've really got to do over there is look out at a grey sky through a rainy window, and well, it makes for some pretty terrifying horror cinema. No more so than in 2016's The Hallow, written and directed by Corin Hardy, the man recently responsible for The Nun. Also, if you're a fan of Game of Thrones, then this film stars both Joseph Maul, aka Benjen Stark, and Michael McElhatton, aka the brilliantly morose Roose Bolton. Great stuff. The Hallow plays out as a folklore tale of old, a family from the city, a newborn baby, and a malevolent creature out in the deep dark wood with strange twisted intentions. It's also a breath of fresh air from the cookie cutter creature feature that we see in modern cinema, and the departure from full-blown CGI, with instead using old school practical effects, make for some terrifying on-screen moments, bringing creatures from Irish folklore to a nightmarish reality. It's great, give it a watch. Coming in at number 4, The Omen. Geez, this film. Admittedly, as I get older, the impact of The Omen becomes less and less, but there's no denying that Damien Thorne, aka the Antichrist himself, is one of the most demonically fear-inducing kids to have ever stepped on screen, and the first time you see his twisty little smile is something that you'll never forget. Here is wisdom, let him that hath understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. Pretty metal, right? Well, in essence, that's what Richard Donner's 1976 on-screen demonic onslaught really is. It's a religiously charged, meandering tale that drags us along through the hallways of hell on earth. Now, I'm talking of the wider franchise in this case because the original film starring Gregory Peck is a much more subtle and creepingly quiet beast. The strange, spacious audio track, the wide lingering shots, and an absolutely terrifying performance from a 4-year-old boy, Harvey Spencer Stevens. I wouldn't necessarily advocate saying a prayer before you watch this film, but I wouldn't tell you not to either. Swinging in at number 3, The Wailing. Oh man, is this film good. South Korean cinema just can't seem to make a bad horror film, and at the top of that pile is The Wailing, written and directed by Na Hong Jin. In essence, this film is about spiritual belief and the inner conflict of the soul. It weaves differing, competing threads of spiritualism throughout, shamanism, ritualistic sacrifice, and even Christianity. Boiled down further, good and evil, angels and demons, which one ends up on top? Well, if you watch the film, you'll find an answer of your own. What you will find though is an occult masterpiece into the weird world of Korean folklore. This film does a pretty stand-up job at keeping you on edge throughout its lengthy 2.5-hour runtime, feeding you tiny scraps of narrative right up until the very end. Also, we haven't even talked about the murder, demon, zombies, or the exorcism, or the cave scene. Yeah, I really don't want to ruin this film for you if you haven't seen it, but take it from me, it's worth the nightmares. Coming in next at number 2, The Babadook. Are you terrified of creepy shadow monsters that lurk behind your wardrobe door? Then please sit down in a dark room and watch The Babadook, a 2014 Australian psychological creature feature from Jennifer Kent. I say creature feature in the loosest sense because, guys, seriously, what the hell is The Babadook? I still don't know, and it's got me pretty shook. That in essence is the success of this film though, the fear of the unknown, the strange, otherworldly sense that you get as a child trying to fall asleep in a bleak, unfamiliar house. It blends the supernatural with the surreal with a pinch of native Australian folklore to boot. Plus also, if you're a fan of the kid fighting back against the monster, then you'll be thrilled at 6-year-old Samuel played by Noah Wiseman, who absolutely steals the show. I appreciate that people have tried to find further meaning in this film's plot, its ending in particular, and while I think that there are wider cinematic elements that tie this film's plot together, without all of that, it's just a gut-wrenching, knees-weak, palms-sweaty kind of horror movie. You know, the best kind. It's a suspenseful, slightly off story about confronting the darkness that lies within. And finally, at our number 1 spot, The Witch. You know what? I get it if you don't like this film, I understand the criticism that it received, but let me tell you, you're wrong, because this film is possibly the most unnervingly, unexplainably, brilliantly strange piece of horror cinema of recent times. It ticks every box on my list, and I'll tell you why. This film is impossibly bleak. It plays like something forbidden, something that we just shouldn't be watching, a glimpse into the long forgotten world where the devil still reigns. It begins with the banishment of a New England family in the 16th century, where we briefly get a glimpse of colonial era society and a newly found North America, but that world is soon shut off, and all we're left with is the woods and the witch. Seriously, this film does so much with so little that it's testament to Robert Eggers, the director and writer, as this was his first debut film, and he's fastly becoming my favourite horror filmmaker, so keep your eye out on him. Again, I really don't want to spoil this film for you, but if you laugh at the idea of being terrified of a goat, then let me introduce you to Black Phillip.
In at number 5, The House That Jack Built. Now, when you see Lars von Trier listed as the director of a movie, you know that that film isn't exactly going to be enjoyable, or an easy experience to get through, that's for certain. I mean, the films under his belt go as follow: Breaking the Waves, The Idiots, Dancer in the Dark, Dogville, Antichrist, Melancholia and Nymphomaniac, to name a few. All very challenging movies to sit through, particularly The Idiots. That was the closest I've ever come to walking out of a film. It was so offensive. So offensive. Melancholia is perhaps the easiest to get through simply because it is the most mainstream and tosses the Dogma Manifesto out of the window. Now, released in 2018 and directed by Von Trier, The House That Jack Built stars Matt Dillon, Uma Thurman, Riley Coe and Jeremy Davis, and follows Jack, played by Dillon, a serial killer who commits a slew of murders in the state of Washington over a 12-year period. The movie is far more of a stomach churner than his previous movies, barring Antichrist, which needs an entire list just for itself. Throughout the movie, Jack commits some truly vile acts, to innocents, to animals, and more that I definitely can't discuss on YouTube. The movie premiered at Cannes following a multi-year ban on the director after he said he sympathized with Hitler. Never forget, that clip still makes my entire body cringe. I just watched it before coming down here. I'm not the same. Now, when The House That Jack Built screened at Cannes, people walked out, and not just a couple of people. No, over 100 people walked out of the theatre, with many of them turning to Twitter to state how disgusting and vomitive the movie was, even going as far as to state that it should never have been made. The movie was apparently so vile that it was forbidden from competing for the grand prize at the film festival, so instead it screened outside of the competition in order to avoid any controversies, like Antichrist. Before we jump into number 4, be sure to hit the like button. It really helps us out a lot. In at number 4 we have Revenge. Any movie centering on assault is always a tough one to sit through, that's for sure. Irreversible still keeps me up at night. That movie is truly the most disturbing thing I've ever seen, and I've watched a lot of horrific. Released in 2017 and directed by Coralie Fargy, Revenge is a French revenge horror movie that follows a young woman, Jen, who is assaulted by 3 men and left for dead in the middle of the desert. However, when she recovers, she seeks vengeance upon her attackers. The movie is a bloody battle between the attackers and Jen, and it truly ascends to levels you never expected it to go. One particular moment that had audience members feeling physically sick, and resulting in one viewer having a seizure in the middle of the theatre, involved one of the attackers stepping on a large piece of glass and having to remove it from his foot. The lead of the movie, Matilda Lutz, also stated that that scene made her feel weird. Now, if this particular moment doesn't affect you, there are many more moments that might, including someone being impaled on a tree, another person getting stabbed in the eyes, and then of course the intense and bloody face-off at the end of the movie. There is so much blood in this movie, it is almost excessive. Revenge is incredibly brutal, and if someone has a medical emergency halfway through, you can only imagine how horrific it must be. You have been warned. Saying that though, it does have a fantastic feminist spin. So that's something. In at number 3, we have the Green Inferno. Now, I can personally say that even I found the Green Inferno hard to sit through. Not impossible, but certainly hard. There were many moments that had me feeling nauseous and even more that had me covering my eyes. Released in 2013 and directed by Eli Roth, the man behind Cabin Fever and Hostel, the Green Inferno pays homage to Italian cannibal films, specifically Cannibal Holocaust. The film itself follows a group of activists who are forced to fight for survival when they are captured by a cannibalistic tribe. Now, it is quite clear going into the movie that you're not going to be greeted by something pleasant. That's not Eli Roth's MO. If you have ever seen Hostel, you should know this. He loves torture porn, and the more blood and gore the better. However, Eli Roth truly pushes the boundaries with the Green Inferno, and unless you're a horror veteran, you likely won't make it through the entire movie, that's for sure. The threats that are made in this movie regarding mutilation of specific parts of the body, disgusting. I can't even say it, that's how bad it is. From start to finish, the Green Inferno is a misery fest, filled to the brim with sadism and gore, and if you find you can't make it through the whole thing, that's okay, because funnily enough, that is exactly what Eli Roth intended. In an interview with Rolling Stone, he stated, I quote, "If I've really done my job as a director, nobody can actually watch your movie. You don't want people walking out of a movie, you want them running out of the theatre screaming. When that happens, that's like a standing ovation for me." The film was so effective due to its use of practical effects as well as shooting on location with real members of the Amazon's native population. If you think you can make it through the movie, go check it out, but trust me when I say it is a challenge, and you will be thinking about it long after the credits roll. Coming in at number 2, The Woman.
Well, let's get you a number of people that also came out. One, it was so sick she fell. We had to get paramedics.
I totally understand that, but at the same
You know,
time,
this is not humane.
If you didn't quite know what was going on in that clip, I'll happily explain it to you. Essentially, this guy walked out of the screening of The Woman at the Sundance Film Festival and got very upset about what he had just seen on screen. He describes one woman leaving the movie feeling so sick she fell and paramedics had to help her. He also goes on to describe the movie as inhumane and does not believe the film should have ever been selected for the festival. He gets very upset, but the Sundance workers handle the situation incredibly well. Anyway, that just gives you a small taste of the impact this movie had on people. Released in 2011 and directed by Lucky McKee, The Woman stars Pollyanna McIntosh as a feral woman from a violent clan who is captured by a lawyer and chained up in his home, where he attempts to forcibly tame her. It is revealed over the course of the movie that the family who kidnapped the woman are incredibly dysfunctional, with the son, Brian, enjoying inflicting pain on others. The movie depicts the madness of this family perfectly and shows what levels of depravity they will go to in order to get what they want. The focus at times isn't so much the woman, but more so the dynamic of this dysfunctional family. However, saying that the acts performed on this woman by father and son are absolutely disgusting, with the torment being unending and unforgiving. You'll have an incredibly hard time, almost impossible time getting through this movie, and it truly is one of the more disturbing films out there, that's for sure. It's not for the faint-hearted. And finally, in at number 1 we have Raw. Raw is perhaps one of the most difficult horror movies for anybody to sit through, and I'm not confusing it with that weird Melanie Griffiths movie spelled R-O-A-R, like a lion roar. This one's something else. Raw is perhaps one of the most difficult horror movies for anybody to sit through, with many walking out of the movie theatre and a handful even throwing up, and some even passing out in the middle of the theatre. Yes, that's how disturbing this horror movie truly is. Released in 2016 and directed by Julia Ducournau, Raw follows a young vegetarian woman who is in her first year of veterinary school. However, after she tastes meat for the very first time, she develops an intense craving for flesh. Lovely stuff. However, she can't quite seem to satiate her desire for meat, with chicken not doing the trick, or even a hamburger. No, what she wants is human flesh. Now, there was quite literally just one scene that had everyone's stomach churning, and that was when our protagonist, Justine, eats her sister's finger after she accidentally cuts it off. When this moment played on screen at the Toronto International Film Festival, 2 viewers passed out completely immediately, resulting in an ambulance being called to the festival. However, these two weren't the only ones to find the film hard to get through, or should I say impossible. When Raw screened at the Cannes Film Festival, a friend of the director passed out as well. Yes, this film just results in a series of people passing out, almost like in Stand By Me. When one person throws up, they all throw up. It should be noted that the finger scene is far from the worst thing you'll see in Raw. It's just the beginning, and if you can't get through that scene, it's best to just turn it off in my opinion.